This beautiful hairpin is mine!
Oh,
The poor
beautiful
fools, they
fan.
stood no chance against me. The look on the treasurer's face. Ah, to have the chance to see that again when I present her with this gift.
Well, I don't know why he's talking to a tree.
This was all supposed to be over by now. When I started this journey of playing through the entire Assassin's Creed series, there were only 14 games on my list, and one of them was an overpriced standalone expansion pack and the other was originally a PS Vita exclusive. In a way, it's a shame that Valhalla is no longer the latest game in the series, as this is easily the biggest game with Assassin's Creed on the box, and the video I made on it was also by far my longest. To that end, here is the current ranking. You'll notice all of the so-called RPG games are grouped together near the bottom, and the reason for that is while I do think those games are enjoyable, they are not what I personally look to Assassin's Creed for. Assassin's Creed 1 came out just after my 20th birthday, and I was all in on the hype for that game, and everyone after it, up until Unity, where I couldn't even be bothered to see it through to the end, and I gave up on the series altogether. The disappointing reception of Unity ultimately caused the series to take a break and completely redefine itself into another entry in the generic Ubisoft open world game template, along with Far Cry and the newer Ghost Recon games. Like I've said before, I do enjoy these types of games, but they're not unique, and as many people have said, especially of Valhalla, these three should have been their own games in a new IP. I mention all this to try and provide some context into my approach going into Assassin's Creed Mirage. The reveal trailer dropping late 2022 was the first time I had been somewhat interested in a new Assassin's Creed game since 2014. Having not played Valhalla at the time, I had no idea who Basim was, so I assumed Mirage was to be some sort of cross between a soft reboot of the series and a remake of the first game, the imagery of which they were clearly trying to evoke, and to my mind successfully so. As more information was released about the game, I remained cautiously interested. Many years of letdowns and disappointments from various games have turned me into a miserable, joyless bastard, and while I tend not to get hyped for many games anymore, I do allow myself to be cautiously optimistic about upcoming releases. Mirage seemed to be ticking all the right boxes for me. A smaller world, a more focused story, a return to the style of games that the series was originally known for. I'd heard it originally started as a piece of DLC for Valhalla before they made it its own thing, but that didn't really concern me. Not until I played Valhalla anyway, but we'll come back to that later. I have also done my best to avoid any reviews or opinion pieces on this game, as I wanted to come in fresh with it. Unfortunately, by simply existing on the internet, I did pick up a few bits and pieces, but with the Assassin's Creed fandom seemingly split into two very loud but opposing opinions on the franchise, I still have no real idea where this game sits in the Assassin's Creed orthodoxy, but I did hear that the cutscenes are crap. And it's true, they are. I mean, Jesus, the cutscenes in Origins were great, but ever since then, we've been watching Team America puppets gesturing at each other with mixed abilities of voice acting. Hi, Future Ben, cutting in here. I wrote this script after I completed the game in early December 2023, but due to moving house and then being out of the country for nearly 3 weeks over Christmas, it took until January until I could start putting this video together. I only mention this because during that time, Mirage received a newsworthy update that I honestly thought would change a significant amount of what I'd already written here. The game received a new Game Plus mode, which personally I think pretty much every game should have by default, but it also received updates to the parkour system, something that, spoilers for later in the video, I have some issues with. When I finally got my office into some sort of usable state, I booted up the game and had a run through Baghdad to see how the new parkour felt. And honestly, I couldn't tell the difference. I think it maybe feels a bit smoother, as if the transition between different animations was quicker or something, but it didn't feel as revolutionary as some YouTube thumbnails I'd seen had led me to believe. I had to look at the patch notes to see exactly what Ubisoft said they changed, and all it says is they've increased the distance of back and side ejects. Again, I didn't notice any major difference with this update, and apparently also made changes to enemy AI and such, but I have no desire to play through this entire game again just to see if the guards act like dickheads any less frequently. So yes, the game has been updated since I put this script together, but from my experience, it has had no effect on my perceptions and opinions on this game. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of the video. I'll get stuck into the story first before picking on the gameplay, because the story here is both simultaneously something I love and something I hate about this game. This should also be a bit easier because other than a monologue from William Miles at the start, there is no modern day story here at all, which I believe marks a first for the series, and I will be spoiling the shit out of this story, so consider this your spoiler warning. We meet Basim in his hometown, I assume, of Anbar, not too far away from the game's main city of Baghdad. Basim and his long-term friend Nihal are a couple of street rats of the Aladdin mould, giving scraps to the local kids and dreaming of bigger things. Well, Basim is anyway. Basim also has recurring visions of a genie, which we are reminded of throughout the game, and Nihal seems to help him out with, trying to help him understand what the visions could mean. Anyway, it turns out that Basim is a big fan of the Hidden Ones, who clearly aren't very hidden because some thief in a backwater town can recognise a high-ranking member of the Order by sight. They also have a lot of branding for an organisation called the Hidden Ones. I mentioned this in another video, I think the Unity one, but look at all the branded merchandise this shadow organisation has. Metalwork, wood carvings, mosaics, talismans, carpets. These must all be done in-house, otherwise they'd have to leave a trail of dead contractors every time they decorate a new bureau. And the huge branded welcome mat on the rooftops just seems silly given the nature of their business. Anyway, Basim wants to impress the Hidden Ones and so goes to steal a trinket from the Caliph in his palace, something that the Hidden Ones leader, Roshan, said she wouldn't even trust one of her high-ranked agents to do. Basim has a go anyway, possibly because he knows he's in the next chronological entry in the series, so obviously won't die in this game, and he witnesses the Order of Ancients threatening the Caliph to look after their chest. Nihal joins Basim as they open the chest to find a disc, similar to the ones from Revelations that Altair recorded his memories into. Basim activates it upon touching it, and the Caliph comes in to have a look at what's going on. There's a scuffle, Nihal shanks the Caliph, and they escape. Basim is less than grateful about this, as he knows the guards will be looking for them now. And the next day, Basim comes across a scene of those same children from 5 minutes ago crucified in the streets, making this the 4th Assassin's Creed game in a row to use dead children as character motivation. It's almost a routine occurrence now, and again, I can't be expected to care about characters I met for 15 seconds 5 minutes ago. Anyway, Roshan finds Basim and helps him escape, leaving Nihal behind because fuck that bitch, apparently, and we jump ahead a few months to Basim being trained at the Hidden Ones fortress in Alamut. Again, with a name like the Hidden Ones, I'd have thought they'd maybe stick to cave hideouts rather than towers of stone jutting out of the earth. We do a bit of training with Basim until the mentor learns about an increase in Order of Ancients activity in Baghdad, and the fortress is attacked by mercenaries from the city. He sends a few Hidden Ones out there to have a look and sort it out, and that's basically the story until the end of the game, tracking down the Order members and killing them. I really enjoyed this part of the story, as we are finally playing a member of this organisation again, with the hoods and hidden blades and everything. It sounds stupid, but I really appreciated being able to strut through the grounds while other Hidden Ones are just hanging out, training, making stuff. That recurring argument for the last 3 games is that they aren't Assassin's Creed games, and I think this makes a strong statement that this is. The stripped back story sees you linking up with bureaus across the city and following up leads to identify and eliminate members of the Order of Ancients. There are more details here and there, Basim struggling with that genie thing in his vision. He meets up with Nihal again, who helps him out and seemingly tries to lure him away from the Hidden Ones, but there's nothing too convoluted here. It is a bit comical how Basim starts off being essentially laughed off by Roshan when they first met, to very quickly becoming, in her words, the tip of the spear in the fight against the Order. Still, I guess he is the protagonist, so he was hardly going to end up as the HR rep of the Baghdad branch, was he? When Basim finally tracks down and confronts the head of the local branch of the Order, who turns out is the concubine of the Caliph Nahal shanked earlier, she tells you that she has in fact been waiting for you, as Basim is the key to unlocking a secret buried beneath the Hidden One's fortress in Alamut. Before she can elaborate, Roshan kills her, and threatens to do the same to you if you go poking around. You and Nahal go there anyway, and find the fortress under attack by what I assume to be mercenaries hired by the Order, which is confusing because their entire leadership structure has just been wiped out. That's what we've been doing for the whole game, so who ordered them to come here? Anyway, we fight our way through the fortress to a big Isu door when Roshan shows up for a boss fight, because she really doesn't want you opening it and would rather you die instead. You have a boss fight, which I couldn't figure out how to get started until a prompt appeared on the screen telling me to throw a knife into her shoulder, and you leave her bleeding out on the floor. You and Nihal go through the usual Isu cave stuff until you find a sarcophagus. And this is where the story kind of lost me, and why I said I hated it earlier. Up until this point I was all in on this story, but this whole bit just left me confused. I'm sure there are some in-depth explanation videos about this, but I haven't seen them yet, so this is what I think is supposed to be happening. You open the sarcophagus to find Nihal, who then disappears as the camera pans around Basim, so I'm not sure if she was really in there. Nihal then appears behind you and shows you the projection from the disc back at the start of the game. Basim then enters a vision with that genie that kept popping up, chasing it through some weird vision desert. This goes on for some time, which brought back horrible memories of that beach from the end of Death Stranding, until Basim finally comes face to face with the genie and, I think, accepts it as part of his past or something. He just seems to decide that he isn't afraid of it anymore and it goes away. It then turns out that Nahal has actually been pulling a Tyler Durden and has been a different part of Basim this whole time, and they finally join together as one. If I ever play through this game again, I'll have to watch all the cutscenes with Nahal to see if she ever talks to anyone, but it's weird that these two are supposed to be childhood friends, and Basim has never had her existence brought into question before. He never talked about his friend to anyone, ever? Was he never caught talking to thin air? Anyway, Basim is now clearly Loki. Spoilers for Valhalla, I guess, as his faithful bird Enkidu scratches his face and he swears vengeance on the one that wronged him. Then the credits roll, and then I went back to watch those cutscenes again because I had no idea what was going on. So here's my take on this, and I fully expect to be wrong, so please do feel free to correct me. But is the genie supposed to represent Odin, who has been plaguing Loki's thoughts until he finally decides to take control of his mental well-being and set out to kill him? I have no idea about the Nihal thing though. Was anything in that coffin? Was Loki in there but only part of him, and he then merged with Basim when he opened it? But then they only merged after he decided he wasn't scared of the genie anymore, so Basim's fear of the genie was preventing the two sides of Loki to merge? If Nihal is the other half of Loki and needs Basim to open the door under the Hidden One's temple, why was she trying to talk Basim out of getting involved with them? It seems like encouraging that would have gotten them into the temple sooner. Agree with Basim, help him achieve his goals, establish yourself as someone looking out for what's best for him, and then more easily convince him to sneak into the cave in the middle of the night and open the door. I really don't know, and it seemed like a weird way to explain how Basim went from a good-natured street rat to heading out across the continent to kill his reincarnated brother. Roshan also survives, obviously because she pops up in Valhalla and just leaves the Brotherhood. Seems like an underreaction, seeing as she would have rather Basim die than open that door, but once he's done it she just shuffles off and they all let her. Seems like a highly skilled and respected master assassin leaving the Order after believing it to be turning against everything it stands for is a loose end that you might want to tie up, no? Like I say, I really enjoyed the stripped backstory right up until the end, when it had to somehow work in the obligatory Isu reveal, which has lost all wonder and excitement for me after all these years, and had to tie it into Valhalla as well. I found it to be a lackluster ending, but I enjoyed it for what it was while I was working through it. Which brings us on to the working through it side of things. To me, this game feels like what someone who has only played the RPG trilogy would imagine the first game was like after someone had described it to them. There's a mix of old and newer style mechanics, such as a return to what I would consider, quote, proper social stealth from the older games, and the bird drone from the newer ones. The first game was essentially Altair working through a hit list of targets, slowly realising that they're all connected. Each target required you to visit a local bureau to get some intel, and then hit the streets to eavesdrop, pickpocket, and interrogate your way to more information before finally going in for the kill. This structure is mostly intact here, but has been updated to feel much less repetitive than that game. But the mystery of what connects these targets is lost because we already know that, and the mystery of the original game is replaced by the mystery of Basim, which we already know is something to do with him being a reincarnated god. Anyway, those repetitive recon missions have been updated to be much less repetitive and more involved, so while they are still essentially exercises in ticking enough boxes, they at least feel less tedious to work through. In the last 3 games, we had a screen representing either the Order of Ancients or the Cult of Cosmos, with the identities of each member being hidden until we find enough clues to reveal and then kill them. This system returns, but it's now called the Investigation Screen and operates in exactly the same way, except it also lists side missions and collectible missions, and everything is grouped into the relevant bureau for that target. Though the only relevancy that has is which building you have to fast travel to occasionally to start missions. You are free to visit each bureau at any point, meaning you can approach these targets in whichever order you prefer. Apart from the head honcho, obviously, that comes at the end. Between missions, you can explore the world at your leisure and take part in some of the optional activities scattered around. There are Tales of Baghdad, which are self-contained little side stories that I barely touched, books to collect, which I did collect some but never turn them in, artifacts to pickpocket and turn in for upgrade materials, and gear chests hidden behind barred or locked doors. Even without these extra activities, the world is a beautiful one to explore, and I'm so glad they finally returned to focus on a singular, smaller but more dense location, rather than sprawling landscapes. Baghdad is a joy to explore, and is clearly being designed with parkour in mind, rather than the last 3 games which had relatively little consideration for crossing a city without touching the ground. While large parts of the cities can feel rather similar, there are unique areas and monuments that help give you a sense of place. There's also a couple of smaller settlements across the desert, one of which feels like a village straight out of Valhalla in terms of parkour ability, and that desert in between is largely featureless, though in a pretty way. But after traversing it once and unlocking fast travel points, I didn't feel any reason to return to the surrounding dunes. At the risk of sounding like some sort of hippie, the vibes of the city change throughout the day. During the night, the streets are more quiet and empty, but during the day you can see kids playing in fountains, town criers crying, people selling their wares, and guards keeping an eye on things. It's the little things that make a difference, and I do remember thinking that the city felt kind of dead while I was exploring it, until I later realised that it was because I was running around during the night, and during the day the streets feel just as bustling and hectic as the first game. Which, on second thought, isn't much of a compliment. And this kind of got me thinking about other aspects of this game that I enjoyed in a more negative light. That's the struggle with being a miserable git. Even the good things are actually bad if you think about it too much. I realise that several elements of this game that I enjoy are just closer to what I consider to be a quote proper Assassin's Creed game than the last 3. First off is the world that I was just gushing about. It's great because it's so much better suited to parkour than any settlement in the last 3 games. But let's compare it to Paris from Unity. Where are the vast crowds? Where are the parkour animations? Why haven't we got the buttons to tell Basim whether to parkour up or down? This brings me back to that soft reboot expectation I mentioned earlier. Ubisoft were open in their intention of this game returning to the roots of the series, and it does feel like a fair effort has been made to that end. But they've returned it to a state that had arguably already been surpassed by other games in the series. Don't take this as my actual opinion, this is just to illustrate my point, but it's like they returned it to an AC2 state, but ignored all the advancements made by every game after that. Imagine if they never had the 3 RPG games, and think about how good the parkour looked in Unity and Syndicate. Now imagine that, but 4 games later. It doesn't look like this. 8 years after the last traditional Assassin's Creed game should mean that this game looks 8 years better. I know graphics aren't everything, but that detail about this starting off as Valhalla DLC starts to become prominent here. Those games didn't have the level of parkourable environments that this game does, and it often shows that the systems aren't really suitable for it. It works great most of the time, to be fair, but like some of the older games, you often end up jumping down when you want to jump up or over something, or get stuck on corners, or just refuse to jump up to ledges that are lower than other jumps we've made before. Those bustling streets used to be an obstacle, causing your character to bounce off people and fall to the floor, forcing you to take to the rooftops and dodge guards up there to make your escape. But navigating a busy market street in Mirage is super easy, barely an inconvenience, as Basim passes through them like a fart in the wind. The only practical reason you have to head to the rooftops is that you can't accidentally jog down a cul-de-sac. If not for that, there would be no practical reason to leave the streets, because the people populating them are just not an obstacle anymore. Throughout my time playing this game, I was hoping for a chase mission to pop up. Remember those from the older games? No, not the one with Charles Lee from AC3, I'm not talking about that because that works against my narrative, but the ones from the Ezio trilogy, which had you legging people through dungeons as they slam gates behind you, or chasing boats as they fire cannons at you. Linear events, yes, but they added a bit of adrenaline to the parkour. Right at the end of this, I thought we were actually getting one, until it turned out to be running through 2 short corridors and into another cutscene. Boo. What I'm going on about here is that while I did enjoy most aspects of this game, it should have been better considering what has come before it. Again, I understand that this started as DLC for Valhalla and so is tied somewhat to those systems. But wouldn't it have just been super duper if, after deciding to make this its own game, they created systems more suitable to that different style, and made something that played like the sequel Syndicate never got? So the parkour works, except when it doesn't, but I personally didn't find it to fail on me any more than the older games did. And all your favourite parkour interactables are back, like zip lines, lifts, beams, roof garden boxes, benches, and there's even a new one in that pole thing from the trailers, though I think I found about 4 of them, and the camera swings around a bit when you use it, which meant I had to move it back when I landed on the other side. You can also pull down scaffolding as you're being chased to slow down pursuers, though again I think I only used this once or twice. Those parkour chases often left me feeling a bit frustrated, as I often couldn't tell if I'd lost sight of my pursuers or which state I was in. But Ben, there are flashing coloured punctuation icons in the middle of your screen. Right, I get you, but the red exclamation mark sometimes stays there after you've broken their line of sight, and after completing the game I still didn't know what triggers it changing from this state to the yellow question mark when they're searching for you. Sometimes it would skip the yellow one altogether and I just wasn't being chased. Going all the way back to the first game in 2007, it was very clear as to whether you were being chased or not, but here I often wasn't sure if I should be hiding. It also takes Basim a few seconds to build up from a jog to a sprint, so I would often accidentally cancel my sprints because I wasn't sure whether he was sprinting or not, ending up with me jogging away from guards sprinting at me with their swords drawn. Jogging casually away from bloodthirsty guards often ends up in a fight, and the combat system in Mirage stays similar to the Valhalla one. Enemies glow one colour if you can parry them, leaving them open for what is often an insta-kill, and they glow another colour if you cannot block or parry and have to dodge. And that's it, simple, straightforward. Enemies seem to do considerably more damage to you than in the last few games, which wasn't helped by the fact that the L1 button on my controller, used to block and parry, has decided to occasionally stop working now. Honestly, I'm not shit at these games, it's my button that's bad. One of the later skill unlocks lets you dodge towards unblockable attacks to make Basim roll over your enemy and position you behind them, leaving heavily armoured enemies vulnerable to attack. This made the combat much more engaging for me, and I wish this was an earlier unlock. Enemies come in a range of flavours, either ranged bastards for whom even a sword to the face won't distract them from notching their arrows, standard melee dudes who can be killed in one counter, staff dudes who take a little bit longer to kill, armoured dudes that you have to hit from behind, and flamethrower dudes, apparently, who are like armoured dudes except they shoot fire at you.
Burn them all!
Outside of combat, there are also marksmen that shoot at your bird, but I'll come back to them later. Dodgy controller issues aside, I think the combat system is fine, nothing great, serviceable if not very exciting. There is one huge omission from the combat though, something that has been included in the series since the first game all the way back in 2007. Brutal execution animations. I mean, there's one or two slightly fancy kill animations scattered around the game, but nothing here made me wince and giggle like the older games this title is attempting to revive. This is practically a series staple, something that survived into the RPG games, so their omission here was very noticeable to me, and honestly made combat a less enticing option. There's also no weapon variety here for Basim, so it's swords and parry daggers all the way. Though different weapons can have different effects, like every 5th attack adding poison damage or refilling your focus bar with each block, stuff like that, which is mostly ignorable if you're not interested. I played through the whole game on normal difficulty settings and never felt like I had to pay attention to what effects either my weapons or armour were adding. I just went with what I liked the look of and I got through just fine. What I don't like is the healing system, which is similar to Valhalla but a little bit worse, and I already hated that healing system. You can find pots of food out and about in the world which will top up your health bar, and you have up to 3 elixirs to heal yourself with when there's no fresh stew or berries available. Again, I'm not a big fan of this anyway, but in Valhalla you could increase your elixirs by picking up food out and about, and this has been removed here. This means either keeping an eye out for consumable chests or visiting merchants, and most of my money in the game was spent at merchants topping up my health packs and throwing knives. I still think Odyssey has the best healing system in the series, and I find this game's healing to be awful by comparison, taking the award of worst healing system in the series away from Valhalla. Congratulations, you suck. I want to take this opportunity to bring up the enemy AI in this game. As guards generally act pretty well and reliably, but sometimes they're just complete idiots, which I found to happen more frequently when I was sneaking around. Guards will often not give a shit after watching a group of their friends get crushed by a fallen chandelier, or they'll find a dead body, come and have a look at it, and then get on with their day. One guard in particular was staggered by a knife I threw at his head, and then just continued to stay in his spot keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. Maybe he's a complete bastard and is used to having sharp implements thrown at him, but either way that's not someone you want guarding your palace. While you're throwing knives at blasé guards, you may start to acquire some notoriety, with a wanted level returning from the older games. Like in those games, you can tear down wanted posters to lower it one rank at a time, or bribe town criers with a token to lower it completely. There are 3 levels of notoriety, and apparently these signal different levels of response from the town guard. According to the Assassin's Creed wiki, level 1 will see those wanted posters start popping up and people will call the guards when they see you. At level 2 this happens more frequently and apparently more archers start appearing on rooftops, and at level 3 the elite guard will be out and about looking for you. I never really noticed any of this other than people calling out for guards when they saw me, but then whenever I had any notoriety I would usually find a wanted poster on my way to wherever I was going, so it was never much of an effort to remove it entirely. I mentioned earlier that this game very much mixes both old and newer systems from the series, and in a few of the developer diary videos Ubisoft published prior to release, I somehow picked up the idea that character progression would be very linear, like in the first few games. That's my fault for a combination of not really listening and hearing only what I wanted to hear. More immediate upgrades are found through weapons and armor stats, and these effects can be improved by upgrading them. Many chests around the map contain decent amounts of the materials required to upgrade equipment, however armor pieces will require blueprints to upgrade them, which are much less common. Like I said earlier, and in the same way I found with the last 3 games, these armor and weapon stats can be ignored without having much impact on your gameplay, at least that's what I found. It is a shame to see that we cannot swap armor appearance and stats at will. You have one list of armor and another of outfits, and outfits will just change the appearance of whatever armor you are currently wearing. This means that if you want the look of one armor set with the stats of another, you're out of luck, sorry. There's also a skill tree here, which thankfully is much more streamlined than that behemoth from Valhalla. You have 3 trees to cultivate according to taste, one for stealth, one for combat, and one for essentially tagging enemies. There are no XP rewards here, so you just get a couple of skill points after completing... Actually, I never really figured that out. It's not every mission that gives you skill points, but some of them do. At least that's what I came to assume to be happening. You also get skill points from completing side missions, but there are also optional contract missions which have their own little economy entirely. In each bureau, you'll find a job board, advertising work from 3 different factions: scholars, merchants, and soldiers. These are missions that can range from stealing an item from an enemy base, acting as a bodyguard, assassinating someone, or whatever else. I do like the fact that these also come with little optional objectives that give you extra rewards, maybe asking you to not take any damage, not kill anyone, or remain undetected. Other than being an additional source of upgrade materials and skill points, completing these contracts also rewards you with tokens which can be spent in the world. Tokens can open you up to a lot of different situations. The most immediate use I found for these was to save up 6 merchant tokens and throw them at the nearest merchant, bringing down prices by 30% from any other merchant in the game. In-game, these tokens are treated as some sort of special tool that can convince even the most stubborn of bastards to do a favour for you, which makes it a bit weird when you need to spend a merchant token to open certain chests. Are these mimic chests that run a shop on the side? Or is it like when people sell jam outside their house and just leave an empty jar for you to put your money in? Yes, I did grow up in the countryside, how could you tell? You can also spend these to convince musicians to lure guards over for a jam session or hire mercenaries to attack guards, and they can open some new options for certain missions. This brings back the system of hiring thieves, mercenaries or courtesans, something we haven't seen since Black Flag, and even then it was barely used, and I'm glad to see it return and actually be a useful mechanic, but I do object to it being locked behind a whole separate currency that you can only acquire through specific side missions. Just let us use dirham to hire people. I mentioned there that these tokens can be used to provide new options in missions, which leads me on to the bigger encounters usually reserved for order assassination missions. These are usually set in a large outpost which contains your target, and you'll get a fancy pre-rendered cutscene that ends with a list of icons that represent different methods of exposing and eliminating your target. Yes, excellent. Those Hitman-esque levels introduced in Unity and expanded on in Syndicate have finally returned. I absolutely loved these things in those games, or at least I loved the potential with that structure and was happy to see them return at long last. Sadly, the reality is that these are much more limited than I'd hoped. For example, the one where you need to infiltrate a harem, which is a difficult place for a big hairy dude to break into. You end up eavesdropping on some maids talking about where a eunuch lives, go and steal his uniform, and then waltz through the front door. That sounds great, but it's the only option available to you. Wouldn't it have been great if this was still an option, but there was also a way to sneak in through some sewers or something, and the fact that you didn't have a disguise meant you'd have to put your stealth skills to the test to move around undetected? To be fair, other missions are a bit more open and do have numerous approaches, but still not to the same level as Unity or Syndicate, bringing up yet another example of something which should have been massively improved by now, but ends up being worse than the examples we already have. While I did try to avoid as much media about this game as possible before playing it, I did see thumbnails criticising the cutscenes in this game, and I totally agree with that. I mean, look at how good the cutscenes in Origins were, and then look at this. Hell, look at the cutscenes in Assassin's Creed 2 and tell me these look better. At least Odyssey and Valhalla had the excuse of having so many dialogue scenes that they couldn't possibly make them all such high quality. I mean, it's a poor excuse, but it's at least passable. This though, there's a couple of proper in-engine cutscenes in this game, and they stand out, even as just dialogue scenes, and it's disappointing that Ubisoft didn't feel they need to put the effort to make all of their cutscenes a higher standard. I also noticed a little detail that we never see a character pull up their hood. Whenever Basim goes to pull his hood up, the camera always cuts away or he walks out of shot, and the next scene has him with the hood up. Assassin's Creed 4 had so much hood raising that Edward even did it when he wasn't wearing one. Once again, something we had years ago done worse or just plain missing here. On the topic of cutscenes, we also get dialogue options during some scenes, though calling them dialogue options is generous because they often just give you the choice of starting a mission now or later. Other times there will be many options for you to choose from, with each option being relevant to a clue that you need to follow up on, and makes selecting each of these options a requirement to progress. If we have to listen to all of this dialogue, put it in a cutscene so it's at least a little bit more entertaining to watch than the in-game dialogue scenes. Why have dialogue options if none of them are optional? This just seems daft. Like I said earlier, you get a bird again, this time called Enkidu, which according to Wikipedia is a legendary figure in Mesopotamian mythology, but I just recognise it as a Viraxu ship from X-Wing Alliance. After foolishly removing the feature in Valhalla, our bird friend can once again tag enemies for us. He can also spot quest objectives like the last couple of games and can spot secret entrances to some outposts. However, some outposts have marksmen who will shoot at Enkidu as he flies over, meaning you'll have to take them out before you can tag guards from the air. I quite like this, and it took me by surprise when it first happened. It adds a bit more of a challenge by temporarily removing a big advantage. Kinda reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 2 when you had to get to a node before you could use your radar.
Did you say nerd?
You can still use eagle vision to see enemies through walls though, so you're hardly left underpowered. Finally, at least I think finally, I want to talk about the focus thing that got a lot of people weirdly upset when it was first shown off in a trailer. After your first proper assassination mission, Basim unlocks the ability to essentially warp around and insta-kill enemies without being spotted. This can be upgraded to eventually let you target, I think, 5 or 6 enemies at once, but you have to be undetected to use it. You stop time, select which enemies you want to die, and then let rip. The range on it is a bit ridiculous, but you clear the space and have everyone dead in an instant. You recharge this ability bit by stealth killing enemies, so it's not something you can spam, and because you have to be undetected to use it, it can't be used to save you from a mistake. I have tried to understand people's dislike to this mechanic. People say it's too supernatural or it makes the game too easy, to which I counter with Evie being able to turn invisible when she crouches in Syndicate, the fact that we're playing as a literal god, or the fact that it's optional and other than that one time you never have to use it. Same with the smoke bombs, noisemakers or proximity mines, these are options and these options can be ignored if you don't like them. Just beat the game without using the focus to prove to all us casuals that you really are the most elite badass there is. I didn't mind it, and I used it a few times to clear rooms, usually if I wasn't really in the mood for another sword fight. Which I think just about covers everything worth talking about with Assassin's Creed Mirage, and means that I need to find a place to put this in my series ranking. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated, especially if you haven't watched my other videos in this series. Mirage is the best Assassin's Creed game to be released since Syndicate, or rather it is the only Assassin's Creed game to be released since Syndicate. But in terms of my ranking, in terms of where I would choose to revisit these games when I'm trying to scratch that Assassin's Creed itch, I have to put this at the bottom, which should keep some of those whiny Unity fanboys from screeching in the comments if nothing else. But I would rather play 3 games that I don't consider to be proper Assassin's Creed games than this when I want to scratch that Assassin's Creed itch. Almost everything I liked in this game has been done better in older games in the series. If this was the big comeback for the series after being on hiatus since Syndicate, I think it would have been received much more poorly than it has been, as any positive emotions around returning to the traditional style just wouldn't be there. I do support Ubisoft's decision to make AC games in this style, but I just hope that if they do it again, they give it a proper go, rather than releasing an expansion pack for an entirely different game. If you've made it this far, well done you, and thank you for staying awake. This now officially ends my series on Assassin's Creed, at least until the next one comes out, I guess. Which I suppose leaves us to looking to whatever the hell I'm going to do next. Fortunately for my bank balance, but unfortunately for my available time to make videos, I will be returning to full-time employment in the near future, so my time to play games will be more limited. I've got a few ideas that I want to put together, and only one of them involves playing through and ranking an entire series again. So while there likely will be a Far Cry ranking series similar to this one in the future, you may have to wait a bit for it. There's some hugely influential games out there that I've never played, and I'm quite interested in the idea of how old but important games feel to people who don't have any nostalgia for them. Then there's the older, less well-received games that people have discovered a new appreciation for that I'd be interested in going back to, and others that were supposed to change the world but kinda let everybody down. All of this to say that I have plenty of ideas for videos, but a bit less time to put them into action, so please do subscribe to make sure you catch those videos whenever they may come out. Finally, I just wanted to take this opportunity right at the end of the video when everyone has already stopped watching to thank everyone who watched, commented, liked or subscribed since the Valhalla video was published. I honestly didn't even expect to break 100 views on it, purely because it was the longest video I'd ever made and that seemed like an appropriate reception. To my complete surprise, it ended up pushing me to over 1,000 subscribers and received over 100,000 views in just over a month. I was completely floored by this response and will be putting together a little thank you video shortly. Hopefully too many of you don't leave when you find out that I don't just focus on Assassin's Creed games, and we can actually have some sort of civilized discussion about games in the comments. Or you can just call me a fake fan and refuse to elaborate, whatever.